Hello and welcome to our FSSC 22000 webinar today on equipment management. I'm Elsabe Matthee, Technical Director for the Foundation, and I'm joined today by our experts, Patrick Wouters, who is the EHEDG Vice President and the Hygienic Design Lead at Cargill, as well as Kelly Mulholland, our Technical Manager. As part of the webinar today, we will look at the following topics. We will start off with a short introduction. Then Patrick will explain the EHEDG perspective, specifically focusing on equipment management and hygienic design. We will then continue on to Kelly, who will explain further our scheme requirements as well as the supporting guidance documents. And we will end off with an industry perspective. At the end of our webinar, there will be a Q&A session. There is some practicalities though before we start. You will notice that you are all muted, and this is because we have a rather large audience. So please, we ask that you use the Q&A functionality to put in all your questions. And as said, at the end of this webinar, we will try and answer as many of those questions as possible. This webinar is being recorded, and you will receive the recording and the presentation afterwards, which will be shared via email. I'm going to first start off by talking about the FSSC branded house. Now, as you know, any house, the foundation needs to be strong and solid to make sure that it is safe and sound. And the same applies to FSSC and our branded house. Our foundation is our values, and these include transparency, integrity, ambition, engagement, and care. You will also see that our house has 3 pillars. It starts with our schemes, which is FSSC 22000, and our new social management system standard, FSSC 24000. The middle pillar is assurance, because we want to ensure that all FSSC audits are delivered to the highest quality and that it provides the level of assurance in the market. To this end, we have our integrity program, which forms part of our governance structure. And there we work together with our certification bodies and accreditation bodies to ensure that we have a robust certification process. The third pillar is improvement. As with any organization, continuous improvement lies at the core of what we do and all our business practices. All of this leads up to the top of our house and our mission of creating a better world. But let's get back to our topic for today, namely equipment management. At the start of 2022, we put out a survey to our general stakeholders as part of our V6 consultation. And part of the questions was specifically around equipment management, hygienic design, and change management. Part of the output of this survey identified the need for us having a more detailed requirement on equipment management specifically, but also how that ties into change management. And Kelly will go into more detail with that during her presentation. We also made a conscious decision not to include Category J1 and J2 into the scope of FSSC, purely because we thought that that was too specific. But I am going to hand over now to Patrick, who will provide us with more information on the EHEDG perspective, specifically related to equipment management and hygienic design. So over to you, Patrick.
Thank you, Elsabe. Very nice to be here, and I'm privileged to explain to the audience about the EHEDG organization. So I'd like to start off with explaining the topics that I like to address and the take-home messages that I like you to keep in mind. First, I'm going to explain what is EHEDG about. What do we do? And also how you can engage with the EHEDG organization. So I explained, or I did not explain yet, but we have the EHEDG organization, and the EHEDG organization stands for an abbreviation which is the European Hygienic Engineering Design Group. This organization was founded in 1989, and the objective of this organization was to develop knowledge and guidance in the area of hygienic engineering and design. As you can see, it consists of different stakeholders in the food supply chain, and together we want to have a common dialogue about what hygienic engineering and design is about. Also like to briefly explain our vision and in which markets we are operating. So I mentioned already we are consisting of different stakeholders in the food supply chain, all with an interest in hygienic engineering and design. The EHEDG organization produces different types of products, as we call it, ranging from different guidelines, as well as having an equipment testing and certification program. Next to that, we are providing training and education. We are working for different and with different groups in the whole supply chain. And on this slide, you can see an overview of some of the members of our organization, which are on this slide large organizations, food producers, equipment manufacturers, but we are also there for small and medium enterprises. The EHEDG organization is European-based, as the name explains. However, we also have a global reach, and I'd like to mention to you that we have in various countries around the globe, or various regions around the globe, a number of so-called regional sections. And those regional sections are there to promote hygienic engineering and design, to explain in local languages what this is all about, as well as to get in touch with the local teams to provide training and education in the general sense of the word. Next to our regional sections, we have also a partner program. And I'd like to highlight one particular partner that we are doing a lot of work together with, which is the 3A SSI organization, which is based out and working in the US. The 3A organization is developing standards for the food industry, and also they are carrying a symbol that is used for certified equipment. Now, their focus is mainly on ensuring that the US regulatory compliance with respect to equipment management is fulfilled. Now, together we are exchanging knowledge, we are reviewing each other's standards and guidelines, and making sure that we are forming a harmonized view on what hygienic engineering and design is about. I'd like to go back shortly again towards the EHEDG product portfolio. And I'd like to highlight again the important things that we are doing regarding guidelines development. We are having many working groups and over 50 guidelines developed, and I'll explain later a little bit more about the topics of some of our guidelines. Then we have our testing and certification program. We have independent laboratories that are performing our testing procedures and equipment evaluation activities. And then EHEDG certifies the equipment. We have different certification programs ranging from closed equipment certification to open equipment certification. And this provides you with another, let's say, security that the equipment is designed according to hygienic design practices. Then we have our training and education program, where we are offering trainings both online as well as face-to-face. This is organized by authorized trainers that are certified and recognized by the EHEDG organization of being subject matter experts to be able to convey the information to the trainees. I briefly like to go back to our guideline development activities and the working groups that we have in place to develop all this very useful information. The guidelines are developed by volunteers from our different stakeholders in the food chain. And I'd like to highlight some topics here in which we are developing guidance documents. First of all, we have the hygienic design principles, which are overarching guidelines explaining the various principles, materials of constructions needed to design a plant hygienically. We, of course, have our specific hygienic equipment design guidelines for closed equipment, open equipment, wet cleaned equipment. Then we have a whole portfolio regarding dry cleaned equipment, which are very useful when you want to understand more details regarding hygienic engineering and design. A little bit outside the scope of this webinar, but we have also documents regarding hygienic building design. Next, we have hygienic process and utilities design. And very important for our organization is the guidelines regarding test methods, which will help the authorized test institutes to perform the testing and certification in a harmonized way. I also like to highlight the work that we are doing in the area of cleaning and disinfection. It's an important prerequisite, and for this we have developed not only design requirements, but also how do you validate a cleaning program and making sure that the cleaning is done effectively. Now, if you are interested in participating, I really welcome you to join us. We can always use extra expertise, and if you don't like to work on writing the guidelines, we also welcome reviewers. So people with experience that like to provide their view on what is written. What I also like to explain to you is a little bit how we got involved with the GFSI organization and how did we work on promoting hygienic engineering and design in food safety management systems. And this work dated back already from the 2017 year, where we started to engage and supported the GFSI organization to set up a so-called technical working group to develop benchmarking requirements for the GFSI. And out of all this work came two benchmarking scopes, J1 and J2. I'm not sure how familiar everybody is with those benchmarking scopes, but I'd like to highlight that J1 was focused on writing requirements for both the equipment manufacturers, equipment suppliers, as well as organizations that are active in developing building constructions or architects and elements like that. J2 is really focusing on the users of equipment, so especially the food producers that is the target scope. Now those two scopes are actually voluntary, and that is exactly what Elsabe mentioned, that not every certification program owner is obliged to take up those requirements. However, they can pick and choose whatever they wanted to include now, and that is what is currently actually happening. The EHEDG has written, as a result of that, a so-called white paper. The white paper is freely available for all of you, and it is an interpretation of the EHEDG views on the benchmarking scopes. It explains what is expected or what you should be thinking about when you want to conform the requirements. Next to this white paper, the EHEDG also started to work on a systematic guideline to describe how you perform a hygienic design risk management and what the things are that you need to think about when you are performing this activity. Now, this guideline is nearly ready for completion, and we hope to publish this in April next month. I will explain some more details regarding this hygienic design risk management approach in my next presentation. I'd like to highlight another important meeting that the EHEDG is organizing this year, and that is our EHEDG World Congress. Every even year we are organizing this meeting, and this year it will be in October in Nantes in France. And this is an ideal opportunity to get in touch with experts in the field, to hear about the latest developments regarding hygienic engineering and design, to get in touch with solution providers, and to really have a good debate about what is going on in the field and to keep up to date with the network. So once more, I welcome you to register and to get in touch. This is it for what I wanted to explain to you about the EHEDG organization. And I'd like to hand over now to Kelly, who's going to explain the next topic. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thanks very much, Patrick. Thank you for that introduction to EHEDG and what your organization undertakes in relation to hygienic design of equipment. So I will now start off by having a look at the scheme requirement in relation to equipment management. So the equipment management requirement included within the scheme has been incorporated to ensure that hygienic design has been taken into consideration at the purchasing stage of the equipment, as well as to ensure that the associated risks of new equipment or changes to existing equipment have been considered within the organization's food safety management system. So the additional requirement 2515 on equipment management is applicable to all food chain categories included within the scope of FSSC certification, except subcategory F2 on brokering and trading. So this requirement requires that the organization shall have a documented purchase specification in place, which needs to address hygienic design, applicable legal and customary requirements, as well as the intended use of the equipment, including the product handled by the equipment. It also requires that the supplier shall provide evidence of meeting the purchase specification prior to the equipment being installed at the facility. The organization is also required to establish and implement a risk-based change management process for new equipment and for any changes to existing equipment, which is required to be adequately documented, including evidence of the successful commissioning of the equipment. The organization also needs to assess the possible effects on the existing systems and determine and implement adequate control measures to address this as well. So that in brief is just what the requirement is that has been added into version 6 of the FSSC 22000 scheme. And next I will be having a look at the guidance document on equipment management. So the Foundation published and developed this guidance document, which is freely available for download from our website. The first edition of this guidance document was published in September last year, and the purpose of the document is to assist organizations on how to implement the FSSC 22000 additional requirement 2515 on equipment management within their food safety management system. It's also good to note that the guidance document has been translated, and it's been translated into Chinese, Japanese, Portuguese, Spanish, and Turkish, and is also available to download from our website free of charge. I'll start off by having a look at some general guidance with you, and this general guidance is included within our guidance document. So firstly, it's important to note that this requirement relates to significant changes to equipment, which can affect its hygienic design. It doesn't cover maintenance-related activities, such as changing a fuse or replacing a frame conveyor belt, as maintenance-related activities are addressed under the maintenance section of the relevant prerequisite program sector-specific standard, such as Clause 8.6 of ISO TS 22002.1 for food manufacturing prerequisite programs. It's also important to note that this equipment management requirement would not directly impact on existing equipment, except where there's a significant change to the equipment. In this case, the organization would need to assess the impact on the process and the system to ensure that adequate control measures have been implemented to address any hazards and resultant food safety risk. However, although the organization is not required to assess its current existing equipment against this new requirement, unless existing equipment undergoes significant change, it's still important to note that the hazards and the associated risks relating to the current equipment still needs to be addressed and considered within your hazard analysis under Clause 8.5 of ISO 22000-2018. Then it's also good to keep in mind that purchasing second-hand equipment in the context of the scheme is still considered and seen to be new equipment, and therefore an organization would need to make sure that hygienic design has been considered as part of their purchase specification for this equipment and that the requirements of this clause have been met. Now we will look at some guidance with regards to the purchase specification. And in accordance with the requirement, an organization needs to document the purchase specification for each piece of equipment prior to purchasing the equipment. The specification needs to address the specific hygienic design parameters for the specific type of equipment that is being manufactured, and the intended use of the equipment must be specified, including the product that would be handled by that equipment. In order to establish the purchase specification, the organization should conduct an equipment design risk assessment that needs to take into account that intended use, the food safety hazard identification, as well as the evaluation, which is the risk assessment. Once the intended use is known and the risks related to the type of products to be packed or manufactured have been identified based on the outcome of the risk assessment, the hygienic design principles required in order to ensure food safety should then be adopted and specified within this purchase specification. And hygienic design principles include, but are not limited to, accessibility, cleanability, drainability of the equipment, material compatibility, segregation, as well as surface and geometry relating to the equipment. Where there are specific customer and legal requirements, it is also important to note that these need to be incorporated into the purchase specification. And then you also can consider recognized hygienic design standards for the specific industry that the equipment applies to. This specification that is developed needs to be documented and it needs to be implemented by your organization every time new equipment is to be planned and purchased. When it comes to changes to existing equipment or even equipment that is custom made by your organization's own engineers or maintenance technicians, the specifications can be written by using the expertise from the different departments that make up your food safety team. Or if expertise doesn't exist within your organization, then you can also consider gaining the assistance of external experts to assist you with this. Items to consider, for example, can include hygienic design of materials used for construction of the equipment, such as stainless steel, smooth and continuous edges where welding is being done, avoiding having fasteners in or above the product contact area of the equipment, preventing dead ends in enclosed fittings, mounting equipment on legs to facilitate cleaning and sanitation around the piece of equipment, as well as the ease of disassembly of the equipment for deep cleaning purposes. The equipment manufacturer or supplier must also provide evidence of meeting this purchase specification and the requirements set out within the specification, and this includes customer and regulatory requirements, as we've already mentioned. This can include the equipment manufacturer's manual being compared to the purchase specification and maintaining evidence of this review for conformity. So we please do request that you go and review the guidance document for further guidance relating to the purchase specification part of the additional requirement as well. Then next, we will look at guidance relating to risk-based change management. And the objective of change control is to handle changes in such a manner that the impact on food safety by the change is foreseen and not missed, and that the correct mitigation measures and control measures are executed by your organization. Change control consists of organization undertaking a risk assessment, determining the risk mitigation based on hygienic design principles, as well as documenting these changes. it's vitally important that your organization's food safety team make sure that the relevant managers in your organization are aware of these requirements in order to ensure that the change management process is followed correctly throughout your organization. And then successful installation of the equipment, commissioning, and validation is also very important. And this guidance document that we've published includes information on these stages as well. So we recommend that you take the time to review this guidance as well in more detail. In accordance with the requirement as well, the possible effects on your existing systems also need to be assessed and adequate control measures determined and implemented. Meaning the organization needs to assess the impact of the changes and make when modifications are made to equipment, and determine whether the change in the equipment increases the risk relating to existing hazards that have been identified within your hazard analysis, or whether new hazards are now being introduced. So if the organization then makes these changes, they then need to evaluate the current control measures and amend them if needed, such as increasing the frequency of monitoring or establishing additional control measures as well. And then when we have a look at the food safety management system as a whole, when these changes are made, the organization also needs to undertake a review and update of the following that's displayed on the screen at the moment. And this includes reviewing and updating your hazard analysis, your cleaning and sanitation program, which can include reviewing and updating your cleaning procedures, your cleaning schedules and records, reviewing and updating your maintenance program, including its related procedures and maintenance schedules and equipment checks. If necessary, review and update your production records, review and update your environmental monitoring program, as well as the allergen management program, if applicable to your organization. And review and update the training program. And the training, you would also need to ensure that in relation to training, relevant personnel are also trained on the updated procedures. And then also update any other relevant verification activities as needed within your organization. It's then also important to mention that the organization needs to determine if additional resources are also needed and whether they would be available in the case there should be breakdowns or any faulty operations are experienced with the equipment at a later date. And then the last section that I would like to discuss with you in my portion of today's webinar is related to Section 8 of the guidance document. This section includes a wide range of resources for your organization to consider, although it may not apply to every organization, but we do recommend that you make use of this information when implementing the equipment management requirement within your organization. So on that note, I hope you found the part of today's webinar useful that I just presented to you, and we encourage you to spend time reviewing all the detail in the guidance document that we provided. I'll now hand back over to the studio for the next part of today's webinar, which Patrick will be presenting. Thank you.
Thank you, Kelly. This was really informative and very good to know what the FSSC organization is planning and asking us to do. I would like to go now into some more details, and I have again listed what I am aiming to achieve in this little presentation. First, I'd like to explain again why hygienic design is so important. Then I'd like to explain how Cargill and how a general hygienic design risk management program may look like. And finally, I like to explain that by also going into some hygienic design objectives and explain the hygienic design principles. So let us have a look again why hygienic design is so important. First of all, it is a regulatory requirement. And in many countries and regions, it is written in our laws that we have to do something about hygienic design. Although not specific, it does indicate, especially in the European law and in the FDA laws, that we need to look at our materials of construction and that hygienic design needs to be addressed. Now, we just heard how the GFSI recognized food safety management systems are incorporating hygienic design in their systems. So another reason why it is so critical. But what is very interesting, and that is a recently published article from the EFSA organization. So they did an investigation about understanding what are the clear factors playing a role in food pathogen persistence in food factory environments. And guess what? The lack of hygienic design is seen as one of the most important factors, next to having a good zoning, as well as having the right cleaning and disinfection procedures. So altogether, very good reasons to put attention at hygienic design of equipment. Now, it is all well to say that it is important. So let us now look how can we actually do this. And in this presentation, I like to highlight some aspects regarding legacy. You heard Kelly already talking about existing equipment and some of the requirements regarding change management, as well as how do you deal with new equipment purchases. Now, you can imagine that in an organization like Cargill, where we are having so many different types of products that we are manufacturing, so many different types of technologies, all with their own hazards to be managed, that we have to have a clear risk-based approach. Now, I'd like to briefly mention now how this risk-based approach could look like from a hygienic design risk management perspective. So I'd like to explain to you our process, and first it is by having a good understanding about the scope. So what are we dealing with? Then it is very important to address this by a cross-functional team. So multidisciplinary team consisting of food safety experts, engineering teams, maintenance teams, subject matter experts regarding hygienic design, microbiology, and of course operational teams to come together and discuss the hygienic design risk assessment. Now, important for this is to have clear design requirements related to the product, to the process, and being able to convert those requirements regarding hygienic design into engineering standards, engineering deliverables, and being able to evaluate those as well, to be able to evaluate equipment drawings, to be able to evaluate PNIDs, and to make sure that the design requirements that have been established are actually implemented. The next phase is getting operational ready, being able to do the commissioning, or being able to be ready for a startup, or being able to assess if all the existing procedures and practices are working effectively, are verified and validated, to make sure that we can have a vertical startup without any issues. I'd like to highlight now in some more details the first step, which is the scope, context and criteria activity, where we really need to start addressing what is important in our hygienic design risk assessment. Now, as you can see on this slide, there are many factors influencing this. Of course, all depending on what type of product you're dealing with, what type of hazards you have identified, what type of cleaning procedures you would like to have, how you want to operate your lines, what kind of maintenance you need to have to keep things in the right conditions, and I can continue. I suggest you have a good look at this, and I'm sure you will find additional criteria, aspects to think about as input for your hygienic design risk assessment process. What I like to do next is explaining to you the hygienic design objectives. And every time when you are doing this hygienic design risk assessment, you have to think about your objectives. Of course, those objectives are there to manage your hazards, your chemical, physical, microbiological, biological hazards that you have identified. And each time you need to think about how can I prevent the ingress of those hazards in my production process, in my equipment. So how do I keep things outside? The next important aspect is the prevention of growth. How can I prevent that growth by having the right design? Next element, which is very important, is the prevention of accumulation. So we want to prevent that inside the equipment there is any accumulation of product residues or chemical residues or any other materials that you do not want to accumulate inside your production process. So those three design objectives are things you every time need to think about when you do a hygienic design risk assessment. Now, to achieve those hygienic design objectives, we apply the hygienic design principles. And I have listed on this slide the main principles that you need to think about to achieve your objectives. So I'd like to highlight segregation. Segregation is an important aspect to keep things out. If you want to design your equipment, you can completely isolate it from your production environment by creating a complete barrier around your production process, and that is one way to segregate. But it is also inside your unit, inside your module, where you can achieve segregation by design. For example, an aseptic valve, where you keep your microorganisms outside your product by the design. Kelly talked about material compatibility. Here we talk about material of construction, intentionally, or it is basically the same. Now, this is, of course, critical when you think about food contact materials, about ensuring no corrosion risk appear, and that the materials that you select are safe for usage. The ability to clean, a very important principle. You can imagine when you're cleaning a process wet, the requirements are different when you are cleaning only by dry cleaning methods. So those design principles need to be defined for your particular application. Similarly, for accessibility. Equipment needs to be accessible for inspection, for cleaning, for maintenance. Hence, you need to define how you achieve that accessibility in your particular situation. Ability to drain is an important other one, because we don't want to leave, as you can see on this little picture, moisture or other residues inside your equipment that you cannot get rid of and which during idle times may cause microbiological growth. Now, this presentation is not to go in all the details of the hygienic design principles, and I encourage you to have a look at the guidelines written by the EHEDG organization or the standards of the 3A SSI, and there are many more organizations that have actually provided checklists that you can review to make sure that you select those hygienic design principles that are relevant for your piece of equipment. And I'd like to illustrate that in this particular slide, where I provide an example of pumps. And what I have done here is to provide you with a classification of different levels of hygienic design. On the top of the pyramid you can see so-called aseptic equipment. Aseptic equipment is the highest class of hygienic design, which allows you to clean in place, to sterilize in place. Alternatively, you can do that also by doing it more manually, as well as though this equipment is impermeable for microorganisms. Next, we have the so-called class that you can clean in place without doing any disassembly, which is hygienic class 2. Hygienic class 1. Hygienic class 2 equipment is equipment that you need to disassemble before you can clean it. Then we have so-called hygienic class 3 equipment identified, and this equipment is basically validated for its purpose. So you know that the cleanability is maybe not optimal, but for your application, where, for example, you have no microbiological growth risk, cleaning is not seen as a very critical aspect. Hence, you can have slightly lower levels of hygienic design, but still validated for its purpose. Finally, you have so-called industrial pumps in this case. And industrial pumps are from a food contact perspective, safe to use, but they are not suitable from a cleanability perspective. So this is just an example, and I also like to mention here that the EHEDG organization has a certification program, especially for the top level of the pyramid, which provides you then with an independent review that shows and gives you the credibility that the equipment is hygienically designed. Hygienic design of components is one element. Most importantly is that we are designing a whole process line that is hygienically designed. So there are other aspects that we need to look at. For example, we need to integrate the different unit operations together by applying hygienic welding, for example. So hygienic welding practices are also important. Next to that, we have to manage cabling systems as an example, which needs to be installed in a hygienic way so that you can clean those and are not becoming, for example, a risk for a matter increase. Ultimately, we need to operate and we have to have process control. We need to automate. Now, elements of hygienic design can also be covered by automation. Important to realize that as well. Finally, we need to install it. We need to make sure that the whole installation allows you to operate the line, that you can clean underneath, that it is well designed and fit for purpose. So, in a nutshell, the hygienic design principles have to be completely integrated in your design. I'd like to summarize now with giving you some ideas about how a hygienic design risk management can look like from an output perspective. And I made here a discrimination between a legacy, so existing equipment versus new equipment. And when we look at legacy equipment, you can imagine we cannot suddenly replace a whole facility because we feel it is not completely to the right level of hygienic design. But important to realize is that when we do a hygienic design risk management, that we can agree, okay, there is no action required, everything seems to be well, and the whole line is fit for purpose. It can also be that we realize the hygienic design is not the best, but by applying the right maintenance procedures or by applying the right cleaning procedures or adjusting the cleaning procedures, for example, by doing more manually, we are able to overcome certain hygienic design requirements which are not the best. Similarly, we can change our operational procedures. We can do shorter run length, or we can look at changing the product formulation, or even look at other means to come up with procedural mitigation measures. Now, and finally, when all this seems not be effective enough, then maybe we need to start thinking about how do we refurbish the equipment, how do we improve the situation such that it really becomes fit for purpose. Now, Kelly already discussed a little bit about new equipment. For new equipment, it's really important that the design requirements are documented, that they are clearly defined, and that they are communicated to our equipment suppliers in purchase specifications, and that we have also agreed with our suppliers what the instructions for use are, and that we are defining our operational procedures through our prerequisite programs, OPRPs, standard operational procedures, such that we are operating the equipment as it is intended. Now, important is in all this process that you also are clearly defining how do you bring your equipment into production, how do you verify, qualify that the equipment after installation is fit for purpose. Also briefly like to mention some of the important documentation that you can ask from your suppliers, so instruction manuals, potentially declaration of compliance, which is an important activity which is actually also mentioned in our EU regulations, that you're asking for a declaration of compliance for the materials of construction. That you document and keep your drawings of your equipment, your P&IDs up to date, and that you are managing as such your new equipment purchases. In summary, this all let us know that equipment design is essential to manage food safety, and that is very important to realize. Next to that, within Cargill, we established a risk-based approach to achieve this goal for the many different situations that we are in our various production processes. I'd like to thank you for your attention, and if there are any questions, I encourage you to address this in our Q&A session. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Patrick, for a very informative session. Also, Kelly, to you, thank you for your presentation. It was all very insightful. And as mentioned, we will now have a look at your questions that's come in. So I have a first question here from Aylin. And Patrick, I think this is one for you. The question is that some food safety schemes and regulatory bodies ask for evidence that the machines are hygienically designed. Can you explain this?
That's a good question and very relevant, and thanks for bringing this up. The evidence, I mentioned already briefly, evidence for component suitability is, for example, by having a certification from the EHEDG as an example, but also from 3A SSI. This could be very useful. But that's only for the component. So then the next question is, how do you get evidence that your whole line is integrated? Now, there are many checklists available in the market that you can use to assess if your line is fit for purpose. Kelly already mentioned that we could hire an external consultant that helps you to ensure that your equipment is hygienically installed. But I think most important is that you show that you have done a hygienic design risk assessment, that you show why you are coming to a certain design decision based on your identified hazards, because hygienic design is there in many ways. You can achieve it in many ways, and there's not always one solution, and I think that's important to realize too.
Okay, great. Thanks, Patrick. And here's another question that links to that one, so I'm going to ask you this one as well. A question that came in from Saki, and he or she, I'm not sure, is asking if there are any international auditing guidelines available to audit hygienic design of food equipment and cleaning tools.
Now, from an audit perspective, there are standards on how to perform a hygienic design, equipment design. So, for example, there is a European norm, which is called 1672-2, that describes how you can construct equipment in a hygienic way. So that is not so much an audit, but it is more a procedure on how to achieve hygienic design. I mentioned earlier, there are many checklists available in the market that you can use to assess if you and basically provides input on which areas you need to look for. Also, the EHEDG has provided and will soon publish more guidance on checklists. Now, yeah, next to that, we have now the FSSC
requirement. Great. Thanks, Patrick. Kelly, I have a question for you from Pavan, and he's asking if it's required under version 6 of the scheme that equipment suppliers have to have specific certification.
It's a really good question, Elsabe. It's not mandatory that the equipment suppliers have specific certification in place, although we do recommend it, and it would be good, as this would assist the organization in meeting the requirements, as the equipment manufacturer would then likely already have the processes in place to ensure hygienic design of the equipment and to ensure that it's being considered, and would also then help them meet the requirements for the purchase specification. So we would really recommend it, as because the equipment manufacturer would then be familiar with the concept of hygienic design and meeting these type of specifications. So it's not mandatory, although it is definitely recommended.
Okay, great, thanks. And then there's another question for you, Kelly, that's from Matthee.
Sure.
And he's asking if equipment management requirement in the scheme is applicable to all food chain categories.
So it's not applicable to category F2. So category F2 for trading and brokering, that's the only category within the scope of certification that it's not applicable to. So the rest of the categories, it would all be applicable.
Okay. And then a question for you, Patrick, from Cleo, asking what type of documentation should we be looking for as evidence to meet the requirement when it comes to the purchasing specification for new equipment?
I actually mentioned already the 1672-2. That is an important norm in the EU where it provides information. But most important is that you define you need to own the specification. So you need to do the risk assessment. And you need to determine which requirements are relevant for your particular application. I hope that answers the question.
And I think our audience can also look back on the recording where you specifically also referenced the documentation to look out for.
Yeah.
All right. Then Kelly, another question for you. Somebody's asking, when is this new requirement coming into effect? So what if you have already purchased equipment, say in January 2024, would the new FSSC requirement apply to this equipment as well?
Really another really good question, Elsabe. So the requirement technically only applies as of April 2024, the 1st of April, so when version 6 becomes auditable. However, an organization would still need to manage the change with the introduction of that new equipment in accordance with clause 6.3 of ISO 22000-2018. So, and that clause relates to planning of changes. So they would still needed to have made the relevant updates to their food safety management system, including updating their hazard analysis, their cleaning program, their maintenance program, even prior to April 1st. In relation to the planning of changes, but the actual requirement to have the specific purchase specification in place, etc., that only comes into place as of the 1st of April 2024.
Okay, thanks for clarifying that, Kelly. Then, Patrick, another question for you. Rafinder is asking, can you explain how to do a risk assessment of any equipment? Now, I know that's a very broad question, so maybe going back to what's the things to look out for, maybe the major steps when you are doing a risk assessment.
Yes, and I certainly also recommend that this will be reviewed again in the new EHEDG guideline, where it is also explained. So I briefly explained how we are approaching it in Cargill. So first important thing is establish this cross-functional team. Because a food safety person on its own, of course, can come up with a number of requirements, but it is just to get that mutual understanding between engineering teams, different persons, also operations, to get an understanding what are the requirements. I listed in my presentation a whole range of scope input questions that you need to think about in order to do this risk assessment well. Of course, and Kelly mentioned that already, you have to have your HACCP understanding. So which factors do you really want to manage by design? Also important is that you cannot manage everything by design. So understand what is the residual risk that you need to manage, like cleaning, maintenance, and together you come up with your design requirements. I think, and that's also really important, equipment needs to be operatable. So the first thing is you have to get your functional requirements ready, you get your process safety requirements ready, food safety requirements ready, occupational safety requirements, and then together you come with your best hygienic design.
Okay, I think that was a very good explanation to a quite loaded question. And as Patrick said, have a look back on the presentation, on the EHEDG guidance documents. There's a lot more information. And we are looking forward to seeing your new guidance document once it comes out in April, I believe you said.
Yes.
Okay. And then maybe one last question, just looking at the time. I have a question here from Bert, and maybe this is one for you, Kelly. How can EHEDG and FSSC best collaborate to ensure that auditors have an adequate knowledge about hygienic equipment design?
It's a really great question, Elsabe. So as the foundation, we do also collaborate with stakeholders like EHEDG. So we collaborated with them in the respect to generating our guidance document. And as a foundation, we also put harmonization program training out there for our auditors as well. So we do help to equip our auditors with regards to the new requirements we've added into the scheme, and this is one of those type of topics which we do as the foundation help to equip our auditors with.
Yeah, and maybe also to add to that, we also took into account the EHEDG white paper when we developed our guidance document. So we try and collaborate with key industry stakeholders as much as possible, especially on key topics. And sometimes also very specialized topics, which this one is.
Maybe to add, I think the training is crucial. And I really appreciate that this point is brought up. And the EHEDG has a training program. There are, of course, other trainers around as well, but we are more than happy to contribute to the training of your auditors to make sure that they are understanding this important matter, very well.
Yeah, great. Thank you very much. And I think looking at the time, we are going to have to wrap up our Q&A session. So I want to say thank you to Patrick and to Kelly for your clear and concise answers, but also to our audience for the very good questions that's come in. And we will also review the rest of the questions that we weren't able to answer and put that out in a Q&A. So I would like to wrap up this webinar and thank you all for your attention, for signing up for our webinar today. And maybe just a request from our side as a save the date. Our next webinar, our Insights webinar, will be on the 23rd of May this year, and it will focus on FSSC 22000, a market perspective. We urge you to please go and have a look at our website, keep an eye on our socials for more information. So thank you very much for joining us, and I wish you all a lovely day. Thank you.